to the How of High Performance. Today, I'm tingling because I've got a sense this conversation is going to be pretty exciting and might even throw us a few curveballs, because we have the wonderful Andrew Powell, whose career to date was squiggly before that became a term. And he is currently the Group Chief Commercial Officer for Robert Walters. Congratulations, Andrew, on your recent promotion. And I'm just thrilled to have you here. So thank you for agreeing to take part.
No, look, thank you for having me. Hopefully I'll be helpful.
I've no doubt, so no pressure. So we understand the context of where your generous insight is going to come from. Could you literally give us a top line, and that might be hard, I know you've had a lot of variety in your career, but a top line discussion about your career landing on where you are now, but just top line, please.
Yeah, so look, I think careers are formed through many different lenses and through many different life experiences. My career is well documented on podcasts and all kinds of stuff out there. But briefly, I grew up on a pretty tough council estate in South Wales. My parents could never really afford to educate me. So at 16, I escaped to join the British Army. I served for 11 years with the British Army, including 6 years with the British Special Forces. I served in several different conflicts globally, first Gulf War, former Yugoslavia, Northern Ireland, a few bits in South America that I can't talk about here. And then at the ripe old age of 27, I decided that actually I wanted something different, because my career was mapped out in the military to lieutenant colonel if I decided to keep my nose clean and pursue a 20-plus year career. But I've always been about change. I've always wanted to understand the art of the possible. So I came into business at 27. I've had a wide and varied career, worked in pretty much nearly every discipline you can think of. Fortunately, a lot of that has been in leadership roles. And I find myself at the ripe old age of, just approaching nearly 56 in December, in recruitment, which or total talent solutions, which I never expected to find myself, but I'm having a whale of a time changing people's lives. So what more could you want from your career?
Oh, well, as a former headhunter recruiter myself, I couldn't agree more about the power it has to change lives for the better when it's done well.
Well. For sure.
Oh, wow. And we could have a whole day just on talking about your career, because I find that so interesting, especially because you were brave enough to walk away from what could have been a very, clear, linear, successful career path. You've been in the real high stakes, because I often say to people on these calls and my clients, it's not life and death, but you have been in life and death, Andrew. So with that varied perspective you've had, both from in business and your military career, how would you very simply define the term high stakes?
I think high stakes is a scenario-based challenge. So what do I mean by that? If you are in a conflict zone and you make a mistake as a leader or as part of a team, then somebody could die, right? So that's real high stakes. And then when I came into business, taking that learning of understanding how humanity operates at its best and maybe at its worst, and how leadership operates at its best and its worst, has allowed me to calibrate what I now call scenario-based high-stake engagement and management. So in business, I think high stakes is normally driven by people. The politics around organizations, the personal agendas, the ambitions and aspirations, the greed, the need to be front and center on certain things. I think it's humanity that drives high stakes, and it's scenario based. So for me in business, I've never really wanted to do anything other than be my authentic self as a leader, because if you are true to yourself and you are all about honesty, integrity and trust, and you're not here to sell ice cream as a leader, right? Because you have to make tough decisions sometimes. So you're not going to keep everybody happy all of the time, although there are ice cream leaders out there. But I think if you maintain that value set through whatever you try and do as a leader, the high stakes scenarios that you encounter, there's nowhere for humanity to go. Because if you don't play politics, and if you don't have an agenda, and if you aren't greedy, and if you aren't all those other things I've just mentioned, then actually where do they go if you're only trying to do the right thing? So that's how I sort of have navigated high stakes scenarios during my business career. But I do think they are people driven.
So you would say your definition of high stakes would be what in that one nice kind of human line? So if we were going to a dictionary and we had your name next to a definition, what would that one line be, Andrew?
High stakes scenarios are all driven by human beings.
Thank you very much. I think it's so fascinating how people react to the language of high stakes.
Yeah. It is. Look, I mean, it could be that your business is underperforming and you need to remove cost. It could be your business is really growing really quickly and therefore you need to think about, do you have the right leaders in the right roles to continue on that trajectory? But it all comes down to people. And, I've worked in private equity, corporate, startup, scale up, all these different environments. And I found if you put the right people around you who are better than you, in some way, shape or form, or at least functionally better than you, and then you create an environment for them to be successful as their leader, magic happens. So it doesn't matter what business you're in, what high stakes or potential high stakes environment you are confronted with, whether that's cost out, growth, whatever it is, it's humanity that creates the challenge.
Yes, and that you rely on that to deliver the opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
As well.
Sure.
Given you've had such an interesting career and trod the path not most trodden by most people, I'd love it if you could answer my next question through two lenses, which is around taking us through a high stakes moment for your leadership and very much the approaches. So what was that high stakes moment and your approach as a leader to how you navigated successfully through? But if you're happy and obviously able to give us one from the world of military, and one then also from the world of business.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you an example of a challenge that was thrust upon me. I won't mention the brand because it'd be totally unfair. But I was in a scenario where I was responsible for the global people agenda, and I had no experience of HR. I'd come from operations, but I was put into the role because there was a view that I was really good with people. But, the business was not performing the way we wanted it to. And we needed to have a more optimized operating model between onshore and offshore. So my role emerged very quickly in that I needed to take a swathe of talent out of our European operations and build a capability offshore. That's real high stakes because you're dealing with several hundred people's livelihoods. You are having to deal with very, very complex environments like workers' councils. You're having to have a narrative and a story that is authentic and therefore you get supported and enabled to make those changes. And, you're not there to sell ice cream, right? So the way I approached that was with complete transparency. I engaged the workers' councils very, very early on in the process. We shaped the narrative together. People were going to be affected, but I made the commitment that not one person would leave that business without having what's absolutely due to them financially. So I think sometimes organizations think not smartly about how they exit people from their business in terms of compensation. But for me, life is too short. And even the people who exited, I didn't nickel and dime even one of them. I made sure they were all absolutely paid what they were due. And, some of those people, several hundred of them, lots of them, are still great friends of mine today. Now, that's a high stakes scenario you have to navigate as a leader sometimes, but you have to do it with integrity, with transparency, with a clear understanding of why you're being asked to manage such a high stakes environment, but look after the people. You are affecting their futures. So make sure that you look after them because it's not their fault. They haven't come to do a bad job. They didn't get up and say, I'm coming to work today to do a bad job. they're all doing an excellent job. It just was the need of the global business was such that we had to make some tough decisions. So that's a kind of a
Yeah.
high stakes business scenario I can share with you.
Thank you.
Military wise, oh my gosh, where do I start?
Yes, I'm sure. Every day.
No, not really, not really. I mean, there were a couple of times during my military career where, we found ourselves in scenarios where it could have gone wrong and badly wrong. But I think the military teaches your brain to think differently under moments of stress. And they do that via repetition and repetition and repetition. So actually, when you get into a scenario where there's danger to life, suddenly your brain thinks differently because the fight or flight instinct kicks in. And because of the repetition and the training you've been through, it's like an automatic response, and the adrenaline is flowing so massively into your body that actually it takes away the realization of the scenario you're in, and actually puts you in a very, very different mindset. So I think high stakes in life or death based scenarios, you have to trust those people around you implicitly, because there'll be people in small teams around you, maybe larger teams, who your life depends upon because of the different skills they bring to the party. And if you can take that learning and that leadership ethos and mentality into business, it gives you a massive competitive advantage because your natural instinct and starting point is trust.
Nice.
Your modus operandi is, these people around me should be better than me or have different skills to me to help me be successful. And it doesn't matter then what business scenario or high stakes business scenario is thrown at you, nobody's going to die.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So hopefully that's helpful. I mean,
very, very. And in terms of yourself, because I'm hearing a lot about people and the training and the muscle memory being there. I'm also interested when you as that leader have responsibility for yourself and other people's literal lives. Was there anything you learned, Andrew, or with reflection you're aware of, that your own self-management as a leader you relied on or drawed upon to keep you in that high performance in high stakes? Just you personally, in your own brain.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've learned is you're always on stage, right? So whether you think you are or you think you're not, you are. And it's a mantra I've passed down to my children, and I say to them, look, whenever you are out of this house, you are on stage in whatever scenario you're in. So you have to be cognizant and emotionally aware of where you're at. So why do I say that? It's because, if you're in the military, as an example, and you are bunkered down and you're on your sleep rest, do not think you're still not on stage, because if something happens or something's incoming, you better get out of that pit pretty quickly and be prepared and be on stage, right?
Yes.
So you're always on stage. And same with business. You walk around an office-based environment, you engage talent, you narrate talent. If you're lucky enough to be a leader, do not underestimate the power of language and the power of presence and the power of engagement, because you are being watched all of the time, whether you like it or not. So I think for me, recognizing as a leader that you're always on stage and being on message, having the right narrative, being on message authentically, having the right narrative that's consistent, making sure people feel safe and comfortable with who you are as a leader, and on the other end of the spectrum, having them clear on what performance and outcomes and standards look like. But then you living and breathing those things is very, very important.
I could not agree more. And my next question kind of takes us a bit more into the personal, if that's okay, because I think high stakes doesn't just exist in your career, in the boardroom or with the shareholders or with the team or in the trenches. It happens also in your life. So
Yeah.
is there a moment you're happy to share with us that your personal life has been high stakes? Nothing to do with work at all, nothing to do with leadership, just within your life, and how you navigated successfully through to a good outcome, whatever that might have been in the high stakes scenario you experienced.
Yeah. Okay. So look, I'll get really personal here, and I'll talk about mistakes, because I've made so many mistakes across my career, both military and in business, that you know people think you sail through life and you're sat as an executive in an organization, but I've made loads of mistakes. So leave me talk very personally. When I left the military, I got married very young for all the wrong reasons, and it was not the fault of my first wife that we separated. It was I left the military. um I had a little bit of PTSD. I wasn't very well, and we decided to separate. That was a massive high stakes moment for me, because I had children who were 3 and 1,
Wow.
and I loved my girls with all of my heart. But I knew that I needed, and we needed, to have an inflection point in our marriage, because it wasn't helpful or healthy for the girls or my ex-wife to continue to be with me while I was not very well. So I made the real high stakes decision to separate, and I made so many mistakes during that separation. I mean, some of the narrative I used to explain why I felt it was the right thing to do, seeing the heartbreak of my young girls of not having their dad around every day, but making sure I was consistent for them. And, they moved back to Wales, which was like 170 miles away from where I lived. But every Friday, regardless, after work, I'd be down the M4 in my car. They'd be bundled back in the car. They'd come back with me. I'll do the same on the Sunday, because they knew the weekends were with their dad then. But that was a real high stakes moment in my life where it completely changed the direction of my life. But I knew it was the right thing to do. And it wasn't just the right thing for me, it was the right thing for my family at the time. So yeah, that was a real tough high stakes scenario to navigate through.
And what do you think you drew upon in that time to get through it, Andrew? To get to resolution, to trigger that was the right decision, because that's a brave thing to admit and a scary thing to admit, isn't it? But how you actually then did work through it to a good outcome.
Yeah, well, first of all, I needed to make sure I was okay, and that's a little bit of selfishness, but I needed to make sure that I had become well again, physically and mentally. So I during the week I threw myself back into the gym, because that's my safe place. And I find the gym massively helps with mental health and well-being. Well, it does for me anyway. And then putting consistency into my routine for probably the first time, in over 11 years, where actually every Friday and every Sunday I was Wales and back with the girls. I knew what my weekends were going to be like. I knew I was going to be present for my girls. There was no exposure for them to significant trauma in the house between mum and dad, because that was extracted. So for me, it was about get well, fix me, have rigor, discipline, and routine, which is something I'd never really had across my time in the Special Forces, really.
Right. Interesting. So again, this might be a challenge given how much we could be, how many files we could open in terms of resource and information and experience. But if I was asking you from both your personal life, and thank you for sharing that with us.
That's all right.
Through your personal life and your professional leadership life, if you could distill it down into kind of core lessons, core learnings through getting it right, getting it wrong, what would those kind of summary of core lessons that you think would be helpful to share with others that help you get through high stakes as a senior, especially as a senior seasoned leader?
Yeah.
What would you say those would be?
I think the first, I know it's everybody wears a little bit of a mask. Let's be really honest. And everybody has a little bit of an ego. Let's be honest, right?
Uh-huh.
But I think trying to maintain your authenticity as a leader and always trying to do the right thing for the business rather than for you has always stood me in great stead. So whenever I've come up against an high stakes scenario, then it's enabled me, because I haven't compromised who I am and I haven't been greedy for me. It's always helped me maintain a balanced perspective of the scenario I'm facing into, but also the people around me know I haven't got a personal agenda. So therefore, if you can maintain a level of authenticity and always try and do the right thing for the business, and the people around you acclimatise to that and understand who you are and why you are making the perspective or the viewpoint that you are, then there's nowhere for the humanity in high stakes to go, right? Because there's no agenda here other than doing the right thing. So, and I think having taken that through my whole career, yeah, okay, I've been caught on the back foot a few times because I've been too honest, or or I've expressed too honest of an opinion, but I don't regret it because it was the right thing to do, and then it's up to somebody else to interpret what that means for them or for the business. So I think two things: be as authentic as you can be. Always try and do the right thing for the business.
Okay. And if I was to be greedy now and ask you for three more, what would you say?
Gosh,
Because my next question is going to be just one. So I'd
yeah.
love us to get a bit more kind of the lessons, the practical ways, the how of leadership to navigate high stakes.
Yeah. So what other mantras have I had in my career? I think I've always tried to put people around me who are better than me. And I don't mean better than me holistically. They might be better than me holistically, but certainly better than me functionally and operationally. There's no, I don't hide the fact I hate detail. Absolutely. If I have to spend my day in a spreadsheet, I can't think of anything worse, right?
I'm
But
with you there.
yeah, but there are people out there who love it, who treat a spreadsheet like a forensic analysis kind of investigation. So I always find a brilliant CFO to work with me who loves detail, but can also do the macro. So I've always tried to put people around me who are better than me, because if you put people around you who are better than you, then actually what it allows you to do as a senior leader is to lift your head and
Yes.
constantly be ahead of the game in terms of how the chessboard of life in business is moving. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is try and seek out people who are different to you. And I don't mean different as in functionally capable. I mean different as in perspective, because it's very, very easy as a senior leader to have people who say yes around you. And that creates massive, massive blind spots. So I quite like putting people around me who've got pretty sharp elbows, who have an opinion, who think differently to me, who challenge me. Yeah, okay, it makes my life a bit more painful sometimes. But actually, the enrichment of the solution that comes out of that is far better for the organisation in the medium to long term.
Yes.
You notice there's a theme here, right? All of my answers are all about people, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't mentioned anything about business scenarios yet. But I think that the third thing is find an organisation that values you. It's so easy these days to just commit to a grind because you need to pay the bills or the rent or whatever you need to do, and just become a number. I refuse. I'm going to use a rude word. I'm sorry, but I refuse to work with arseholes.
Oh, we can highlight language. It's fine, Anne.
Yeah. Okay. So I reserve the right to only work with organisations and people who I believe are trying to do the right thing. And I've walked away from roles in the past where I've been asked as a senior leader to execute on a particular strategy, and I didn't feel the strategy was the right thing to do. And much to the horror of my family, I've just resigned with nothing to go to, no pipeline of opportunity. But I've always believed that if you try and do the right thing, somebody somewhere will look after you. So find an organisation that values you.
I agree. So if we were now going for the mic drop moment, okay, and there's only one from all your rich experience, and we've literally not even scratched the surface, I know that, but there's obviously a huge emphasis on people, which is why you're in the roles that you've been doing. If you could just give, so there's a fellow C-suite leader, senior leader, who's facing a high stakes moment, and they're just looking for some advice, want to make sure they haven't got any blind spots, etc. Obviously, it's a bit of a broad brush question because it's, but if we just said, hey, there's one piece of very simple, very practical, very how-led advice to get you through as a senior leader in a good way, through high stakes, what would your only one piece of advice be, please?
Don't compromise yourself.
Nice.
It's really easy in an high stakes environment to play the corporate game or the political agenda, but I think you'll always regret it, because you know in your heart, walking into that high stakes conversation, scenario, whatever, what is the right thing to do for you and for the business. You know it. Now, you might have mortgages to pay, or what, as we've just said, right? But don't get me wrong, I have in my career put an opinion in play that's very, very different to the strategy that I believe needs to be executed against. But as part of an executive team, I have had to compromise on the outcome sometimes to make sure that the narrative into the organization is consistent. But I've made sure that at least my perspective and at least my opinion and at least my view is in play in relation to that strategy to be executed against. And where that strategy to be executed against is so far away from my moral compass or my value set, I've just walked away. And do you know what? I've made loads of mistakes, but I have no regrets.
Nice. How would you flip that into a positive, as in don't compromise? How would you flip that into the positive opposite of that?
Be the authentic you.
Nice. Thank you.
Not everybody will like you for it. Not everybody will respect you for it. Not everybody will appreciate you for it. But you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I did the right thing for me.
I think a leader that likes and respects themselves authentically, that's powerful, isn't it?
Massively. And if you have a political agenda, like we talked earlier, or if you have a greed agenda or a career agenda, or if you come across a leader like that, there's nowhere for you to go.
No. Yeah. I always say when I'm doing my work and in conversations, people forget at their peril that at the end of the day, we are animalistic beings.
Absolutely.
We have instinct. We have that radar, fight or flight, that we aren't using out there in life and death, but we are using it in the equivalent in the boardroom or real professional success. And I think when we don't listen to that radar or we try and mask our true intentions, people just know.
Yeah, of course they do.
Even if they don't want to admit they know to themselves, it'd be like Pandora's box. I can't see it, it's not there, but we know it's there. Andrew, you have been incredibly generous and open, and I could sit and listen and go down so many rabbit holes with you, which would be amazing as a Warren, but I know we don't have the time for that. So I'd just like to thank you so much for coming and taking part, sharing your wisdom and being so authentic in our call today. Thank you so much.
Okay. No, thank you, Sally, for having me.